Hello everybody, my name is Paul McKeever, and this is my new guitar build. You know, over the last year or so, the coronavirus has left us all indoors and with very little to do, and apparently this has had an effect on the supply of guitars and therefore on the price of guitars. A lot of people wanting to stay home, play guitar, learn guitar, maybe get the dream guitar they always wanted, and build their chops, what have you. The result is that you're seeing things like videos where in March of this year, 2021, I saw a video on YouTube where a guitar store was telling people who are interested in starting their own guitar stores, don't do it right now because you're going to have a real problem getting guitars into stock. You won't have anything to sell. Gibson, Fender, you name it, the big companies are having, they have major backlogs because there's just so much demand for their product. And, but then again, maybe that's not what you're looking for. And in my case, I wasn't really looking for a guitar that's just off the shelf. I wanted something with a Stratocaster shape. I'd been talking with a friend on Facebook about Padauk necks. And I thought, well, a neck made out of Padauk wood not only looks great, but according to videos I'd seen and heard, these Padauk necks not only look great, but sound great. So I was thinking, okay, wouldn't it be great to have a guitar with a Padauk neck? Well, when you get into Padauk necks, you're not normally talking about Gibsons and Fenders and that kind of thing. You're talking more about a custom order perhaps, or build it yourself, as they call it, a Partscaster, if you're building something of a Stratocaster or Telecaster nature. So I started thinking, okay, maybe if I ever do build a guitar, I'll have to buy something like a Fender body, used. Maybe someone's sold a body because the neck's cracked and they couldn't repair it, and I'll just buy a Padauk neck, stick it on there and go from there. But it's a lot more complex than that because I also wanted to have a whammy bar. I didn't want a fixed bridge. And that raises a whole new set of concerns. What kind of whammy bar do you want? Do you want one that you can not only push down, but pull up to raise the tone? Do you want one with locking nuts, or do you want one that has rollers, or do you want one with a regular standard, regular nut? If you're going with a Fender style whammy bar, do you want one with the traditional old 6 screws or the 2 pivot points and all these things? And so I decided, well, if I ever do this, I'm really going to have to plan it out. Well, as luck would have it, I got bored about 3 weeks ago and I decided I was finally going to bite the bullet and I was going to look into what it would take to build my own custom guitar. I had heard a little bit about this one company in the United States called Warmoth, W-A-R-M-O-T-H, and they have a website, warmoth.com. And I started noodling around on their website and was really impressed. What's even more impressing, I think, is that here I am, I'm used to their system now, I'll tell you about it in a second, but they're changing it on June 19th. So the new one, I guess, is going to be even better. But let me just tell you about the site as it stands right now and as it stood when I started noodling around on there. It basically takes you through a 2-step process: picking a neck, picking a body. And you design a body, tooth to tail, you finish that part, throw it in your basket, design a neck, tooth to tail, put it in your basket. And some of the things you won't necessarily buy from Warmoth. Like, for example, in my case, I didn't buy pickups from Warmoth. I didn't buy a whammy bar from Warmoth. I didn't buy a nut from Warmoth. I'm not buying tuning machines from Warmoth. I'm getting a Stratocaster body with the traditional route for the bridge, a 6-screw route. I decided to go with a swamp ash body, but I also wanted a bit of style, so I chose a quilted maple top. And I used the various tools on the Warmoth site to have a look at the different finishes, what they would look like, the transitions from the back to the front, because I wanted a black back. The colors of knobs, the colors, whether the finish was flat or shiny, that kind of thing. So before actually building anything on the Warmoth site, I had to plan out what parts did I want to put on this guitar, what was available from Warmoth, what would I have to source from other places. The things that I ended up choosing that I had to source from other places included pickups. I had a good experience with Kinman pickups because they're noiseless. Usually when you go with a single coil pickup, like the kind normally found on a old-fashioned Stratocaster, you're going to hear this buzz. I think it's a 60 cycle hum. Whenever you're not playing it especially, you'll hear that buzz. And so starting in the, I believe it was the 40s or 50s, various companies started coming up with different ways of canceling the hum or bucking the hum. And so you ended up with Gibson humbuckers and etc. Well, Kinman came up with his own solution for reducing the noise of a pickup while not sacrificing any of that single coil tone, which tends to be not so lossy with respect to tone. When you make a humbucker, normally you're going to sacrifice a bit of the original tone of a single coil in order to buck the hum. So Kinman I'd had good experience with. I did a video years ago where I had taken P90s out of an Epiphone guitar that I purchased for my younger son and replaced them with the Kinman noiseless pickups, and they were just great. They really killed the noise in my very noisy house with a lot of mains hum. They did a dramatic job there, and I have no reason to believe they won't do the same. Having researched on the Kinman site their different kinds of pickups, I decided to go with a Hendrix set. So it's a custom set made by Kinman with different pickups for the bridge, middle, and neck positions. I also found that the Kinman pickups can be purchased along with a Kinman wiring harness. Now, the wiring harness is effectively a solderless, kind of like a breadboard, in which you put the wires into this harness, this plastic sort of box with connectors on it, and you can put the switches and the knobs and the pickups and the jack, hook them all up with this harness, rather than soldering everything and trying to first hone your soldering skills. You might actually damage some components if you haven't done any soldering before. The advantage to me, above and beyond even the getting rid of the soldering task, was that Kinman is one of the, I guess, 3 main people who came up with ways to deal with the problem that happens when on most guitars you turn down the volume, and at the same time as you're turning down the volume, the tone tends to drop off and you end up with kind of a muddy nothing sound. So they have a circuit. Actually, there are a number of different ways to do it, a number of different circuits, which are tone bleed circuits. And the tone bleed circuit effectively makes sure that when you turn down the volume, you're not also turning down the tone. You don't lose the tone that's available at the full output of the knob. When the knob's on 10, that tone is going to be carrying on down right when the knob's down to say 1 or 2. Well, the Kinman harness automatically comes with the Kinman style of treble bleed, which from what I've heard on the internet is probably the best of the 3 I've heard. So bonus for that, I got the harness ordered along with the Hendrix set. And there are a whole bunch of other things that perhaps I'll get into when the Kinman pickups arrive, just to show you how detailed that whole process was, but in a pleasurable way. The other thing I did not want to run into was a Floyd Rose type whammy bar situation. Not because there's anything wrong with them. It's just that my son, I purchased a guitar with a Floyd Rose system on it for my elder son, and he ended up not tightening the nut at all. The idea of the Floyd Rose, of course, it's a whammy bar system that keeps the strings locked in place. You can't turn the knobs and lower or raise the pitch of the knob. It's locked in literally with clamps. And so if you want to do something like drop D, you want to take your E string and turn it down 2 tones, you can't do it without loosening off this bolt and doing it that way. And it's a whole rigmarole. So I wanted to be able to do drop D tuning or change my tuning without having to take out an Allen wrench and take a clamp off of something. Plus, I just found the microcontrollers on the Floyd Roses on the bridge end, they're just a pain. They're not a pleasure to use, at least not the one that my son had. So I did observe that on the Fender Custom Shop Jeff Beck model, they combined a Fender tremolo unit with 2 things. One is an LSR nut. It's a rolling nut, so if you take a really close look at it, you'll see that where each string comes in and over the nut, there are 2 tiny ball bearings, really, that the string rolls over. So that when the string, you push down on the whammy bar, the string wants to move this way, creep this way a little bit, it's okay. It's not going to get snagged on the nut and then have a hard time coming back and therefore go out of tune. So it rolls nicely over the nut. The other thing that is important when you're using a Fender style neck that doesn't have a tilt, so you're using a Fender style neck, here's the fingerboard, right? And here's the headstock. On a Gibson, it would normally be like this, and there would be tension where the string goes over the nut and comes back, and that tension would hold the string into the grooves of the nut, okay? Holds the strings in so that, if the tuners are here, you're putting 3 and 3 strings into these tuners, there's enough tension there that the string's not going to pop out of the nut. Well, not so when you've got something like this. Here's your fingerboard and here's your headstock. And if you put 6 in a row here, what you end up finding is that there's not enough tension at the nut to keep the E and the B string, the high E and the high B and the B string, from sometimes popping out of the nut, popping out over the nut. And so what Fender has done traditionally is they put string trees on there. So in other words, here's the headstock, here's the neck. They put string trees here that hold the string down a little tighter so that they are tighter over the nut. Well, that's okay, except that that's yet another place in which if you're hitting the whammy bar, you're going to perhaps get some grab, and then the thing might fall out of tune. So on that Jeff Beck model, the Fender Jeff Beck model, what they did in addition to adding this LSR roller nut is they had Spurzl tuning pegs. And the Spurzls, I'll just draw a tuning peg. A standard tuning peg might look like this. You know, the string goes in there after it comes over some nut and goes in there. Well, the thing about the Spurzls is they have made tuning pegs of 3 heights. So they'll have 2 at the highest level, 2 at a slightly lower level, and then 2 at the lowest level. Kind of like that. And this is where your E string, like your low E string and your A string would go, your D string, your G string, your B string, and your E string. And so you can see that by putting this virtual line in there, even though this headstock is relatively flat and parallel to the neck, you're creating that over the nut. I can't do this backwards worth the darn, but you're creating a system where you're getting this string low because it's got a very low post, as opposed to this one, which is going to have the higher post because it's closer to the nut. Anyway, this solves the problem, I think, of the string jumping out of the nut. And so what I decided to do is combine a Warmoth neck with Spurzl tuners and an LSR nut. But then the question becomes, okay, well, what are you going to use for the whammy bar? You're not going to use a Floyd Rose without a locking nut. It makes no sense. The Fenders, there's nothing wrong with a Fender whammy bar. It doesn't go down very far though. Like if you really want to do a deep dive bomb, something like, you know, Eddie Van Halen might have done an Eruption, or something that Jimi Hendrix might have done, or if you're listening to Electric Reflections of War, I'll let you Google who that is, you're going to want to have that string just flapping in the breeze, okay? So I was looking for a whammy bar that would allow me to really take it right down, bring the string, slack it right off, or even pull it up higher so that an E string might be pitched up to an F instead of being left at an E. What fit the bill? And as it turned out, there was one company in particular that I found particularly attractive. It really takes advantage of the width of the route within the guitar, and that was Vega Trim. So there's a Vega Trim Ultra. It's a very narrow unit, and for that reason, it can pivot a lot in a very narrow cavity that's provided in a standard Fender Stratocaster route. And so I went with the Vega Trim. We're going to give that a whirl together with the Spurzl tuning pegs and the LSR nut. That's going to be the setup, along with the Hendrix set of pickups made by Kinman. The guitar, as I say, will be that Swamp Ash with a top that's figured maple. The neck will be the Paduke. And the fingerboard, I decided to go with dark Indian rosewood and the, I would say the larger, I guess they call them jumbo frets, but they're not particularly wide. They're kind of taller, and they're stainless steel, so they'll last longer. They might be a little more shiny or a little high end, but I'm going to give it a whirl. It's just a neck. I can always replace it. So that's the start, and I'm going to show you, I think I'll do breakaway videos on each of the various components and how I shopped for them. I think that makes more sense. And I'll do that as the parts come in, because as I say, guitars are, they're backlogged, and that's no different at Warmoth. I think when I finally placed my order with Warmoth, or maybe it was just before I placed the order, there was a warning that says, you know, if you want this feature, that feature, that feature. And I think in my case, it was going to be something like, you know, 10 to 12 weeks, because I've got, you know, this laminated top, and I've got a special finish. I've got a tiger's eye finish. I'll show that to you. So it's going to take longer. Other bodies take less time because they're not as complex to or involved to make. So keep that in mind when you're selecting what you want, if time is of the essence. Anyway, I'm looking forward to putting this together. One thing has arrived so far, and that's the Vega trim. And I've actually produced a video of an unpacking of that. Maybe I'll combine that with the Vega trim shopping experience and how I found that Vega trim in the first place. Anyway, let's consider this the first in a series that I'll call New Guitar Build. And until next time, I'm Paul McKeever, your resident blues lawyer. Take care.